Hello, I'm a new bride who has been married for just 3 months. What do you think about people's blood types? To be precise about the B blood types, I have a reason to be interested in blood types because of my father-in-law. When I went to his house to get our marriage approval, he asked me bluntly what my blood type was. So I told him that it was type B, and then he immediately concluded by telling me, "I thought you were that blood type just by looking at you." B types are known to be stubborn with strong personalities. They are very straightforward, quick with their tongues, and will speak their minds. They are often seen as selfish people. I didn't understand why he was saying that, as we had just met each other for the first time. It seemed unnecessary to make a fuss about blood types. In fact, there is no scientific basis for the claims made in Japan. I couldn't believe that there are still people who believe in these false interpretations and use them to judge others. But his faux pas didn't end there. I know this because I have dealt with a lot of people. He said girls with your body types are also mostly very stupid. I was taken aback by his statement. Is there a saying that big-breasted women are brainless? Is that why you couldn't get married even though you are over 30 years old? What a ridiculous thing to say. He made a fool out of me by applying his inappropriate and ignorant logic. I thought he would drive me mad that day, and I couldn't suppress my feeling of being very offended by him. Despite the purpose of the meeting, I spoke my mind. "Father, what is your blood type then?" I asked. He replied, "I'm a hard-working and detail-oriented type A." I was surprised by his answer. "What do you mean A types are hard-working and detail-oriented?" I asked. "They are narrow-minded and tactless, unable to speak up in front of people, but quick to take revenge behind their backs." That's what I've read about type A personalities. I couldn't believe that he had such a personality. It is said that people with small irises and more white sclera, like you, are very snobbish and perverted to the point of being vicious. I'm not saying that you are like that, so please don't take me seriously. At my words, his face turned bright red. He lashed out at me. But he shouldn't have, especially with added interest. Both my husband and his mother seemed very uncomfortable. I was uncomfortable with how I didn't back down against my father-in-law's insolent behavior. My husband takes after his mother's personality, where he avoids arguments at all costs and only frets about it internally. So, it was difficult for them to watch us. However, looking at my father-in-law then, I shouldn't have let it pass so easily at that time. I should have spoken out firmly about my thoughts even more. Anyhow, my father-in-law was offended that I was talking back to him boldly, so he brought up the topic of money as his secret weapon to crush me. "So is your father just an office worker?" I heard from Scott that he is around my age and his position is a manager. However, at his age, why is he only a manager? Also, I heard your father lives in a rented apartment. In such financial circumstances, would you be able to afford the wedding expenses? Even if I buy a 2,000 square feet condo for our newlywed home, you won't be able to afford to furnish it. So, I'm conflicted about whether I should buy it for you or not. My father-in-law cleverly brought up my family's financial predicament to crush my pride. If that was his purpose, he succeeded at least halfway. Unlike my in-laws' wealthy family for generations, who never had any money worries, my family could not survive if my father didn't bring home his pay, even for a month. Truthfully, there was a huge financial gap between my father-in-law, who was the owner of vast real estate properties, and my father, a salaried worker without any savings. Thus, I had nothing to say when it came to money. The reason our family struggled financially was that my dad was trying to pay for my mom's medical expenses. She passed away 17 years ago, and he had to sell all of the properties he inherited from his father. His earnings all went towards raising 3 children as a single father. He became a widower before he was even 40 years old, and had to raise young children by himself. So he suffered a lot as the sole wage earner. He sent all 3 of us to college, so he had no savings. Of course, we are now paying off our student loans as we all have jobs, but we still live on a tight budget. Even if there was extra money in the family, I couldn't take it to spend freely. I had to think about my siblings and my dad's life after he retired. Thus, I was trying to get married with the money I had saved, and my father-in-law knew that and was rubbing it in. I bit my lips and couldn't say anything back. My father-in-law saw me and smirked at me triumphantly. Right then, my husband intervened. "You don't need to buy us our home," he said. "We want to start on our own. With the money I have saved and a bank loan, we will be able to buy a 1,200 square foot townhouse. We can start there and get a bigger one later." My husband smiled at me, but inside I wasn't pleased. Even though I may sound materialistic, I couldn't help but wonder why we would refuse his father's offer to buy us a home. How long would we have to struggle to get a place on our own? On the other hand, I felt ashamed that I was thinking like that. It would make me no better than my father-in-law, so I sided with my husband. "Thank you for thinking so generously of us, but we are adults. We'll try to buy it on our own." I ended up saying something I didn't mean. My father-in-law seemed startled and stared at me intently before saying, "Okay, if that's what he wants." And that's how my first meeting with my in-laws ended. That day, as I returned home in a taxi, I felt sick and regretted turning down the offer for a 2,000 square foot condo. I was disappointed in myself for being materialistic and coveting something like that. A few days later, my husband came to my house to meet my family for the first time. Since my mother passed away early, my dad filled in her shoes by acting like a mother to us. He even took a half day off from work to prepare food. When I got home with my husband, my dad had already prepared and set the table with various dishes. We were both hungry from work, and the smell of food made us jump right in and gobble it up like crazy. My dad looked at us eating so happily and said, "Welcome to our family. A family is nothing special. If we eat together, then that makes a family." He then turned to my husband and said, "Scott, I hope you will make our Susan happy. She lost her mom when she was young, so she suffered a lot as the oldest daughter. She had a lot of responsibilities that must have been hard for her, but she never complained and always put herself second to her younger siblings. So I want Susan to live for herself now and for her own happiness. As a father, I feel guilty for putting too much work on her to handle. So on my behalf, I hope you'll be on her side and take good care of her. That's all I want." My dad had tears in his eyes as he talked to my husband. My husband seemed to be moved by my dad's sincerity, and unlike his normal self, he swore to my dad that he had nothing to worry about. So, after we got the permission to marry from my dad, we set the wedding date. We also set the date for both sides of the family to meet before the wedding and made a reservation at a restaurant. I was still worried because wedding expenses and matters of the gifts were still not discussed, but I felt somewhat relieved that it had progressed this far. On the day our families were to meet, our family of 4 left early, taking the subway because of the heavy weekend traffic. However, we arrived earlier than expected, so we decided to kill time at a large bookstore nearby. When we went into the bookstore, a middle-aged woman said hi to my dad as if she knew him. Then my dad also greeted her somewhat awkwardly. At a glance, I could tell that my dad was uneasy to see her. On the other hand, she treated my dad as if she was his superior. "Well, John, what a surprise to see you here. It's good I ran into you. I was going to give it to my husband to give it to you. But now that I met you here, I'll give it to you now. Last time, thank you for helping us at our daughter's wedding. This is a gift certificate. Here, take it." She handed over an envelope containing a gift certificate, but my dad refused to take it. "No matter that you work for my husband, but still, you did all the work for our family, so please take it. You can buy a pair of nice shoes. Those shoes that you wore that day were so worn I even felt embarrassed. Now that your daughter is getting married, you can't attend the wedding wearing such shoes. So please buy a new one with it." My dad kept refusing to take it, but when she put it like that, he became so ashamed that his ears turned red, and awkwardly he took the envelope from her. As I watched him, I got choked up. I hadn't paid any attention to him before, and only then I noticed his worn-out shoes. Because I was busy trying to manage our household's tight budget, as his daughter, I felt so guilty for not even noticing my dad's old shoes. The woman got in the elevator after my dad thanked her, and when I asked my dad about it, he explained the situation to me. My dad asked who she was, and he said she was the wife of his boss at work. Then I remember hearing about my dad's complaint about his boss. He was making my dad do his personal errands, putting my dad in an awkward position. Whether early in the morning or late at night, his boss wouldn't care, and kept calling my dad at his whim, demanding my dad to do things that were not related to work. My dad's position was a manager, but he made my dad deliver the wedding gifts for his daughter's in-laws. It wasn't only that. When his daughter was coming back early after she had a fight with her newlywed husband from her honeymoon, he made my dad go early in the morning to pick her up at the airport. He absolutely had no manners. I was so angry that I thought about sending a complaint letter to the company CEO. Those were the things I knew about, but at work, I wondered how much more he pestered my dad. I didn't even have to see it to know what was going on. Now that I saw how his wife treated my dad, my heart ached even more. It wasn't enough that my dad was being treated like that by his boss, but he was also being abused by the wife of his boss. I felt so sorry for my dad. If it weren't for his children, he could just quit, but he couldn't, and had to endure such condescending treatment at work. My dad, as if he got caught with humiliation he didn't want us to see, couldn't even look at us directly, and just rushed out of the bookstore. As I watched my father's back, I felt like crying. So I didn't ask anything more and rushed my younger siblings along and went to the restaurant. My husband and my parents-in-law had already arrived. At that moment, my father-in-law and my dad looked shocked as they saw each other. "John, what are you doing here? Is Susan your daughter?" My father-in-law frowned, displeased, and asked my dad. My dad's face hardened too and just looked at me and my husband. He remained silent. At that time, I just thought my dad happened to know my in-laws, but my father-in-law happened to be my dad's boss. My dad was looking perplexed at my mother-in-law, who was standing beside her husband. Then, my father-in-law realized something was wrong and quickly took my dad outside with him. Every one of us remained confused about what was going on. After about 10 minutes, my dad and my father-in-law came back. I didn't know what they had talked about, but my dad didn't look happy. On the other hand, my father-in-law acted as if nothing happened and acted snobbish in his usual ways. Who knew I would have my employee as my in-laws? How small the world is. I heard that you had a daughter, but I didn't know she would become my daughter-in-law. However, she's not like you at all. She's very blunt. You know my personality, but you need to tell your daughter about me so she would better understand me in the future. However, if the company finds out that you and I are in-laws, would it be uncomfortable for both of us? We can't say no when both of them want this marriage. So why not have a small wedding with just our family? These days, a small wedding is a trend among young people. My father-in-law acted as if he was holding a company meeting and tried to decide everything his way. Even though that bothered me, no one said anything against it. That included my dad. That meeting ended with my father-in-law doing all the talking and deciding by himself. As soon as we got home, my dad called me separately and asked, "Susan, do you have to have this marriage? I really don't like it. It's very uncomfortable to have my boss as my in-laws." My dad didn't finish his sentence. "Dad, why should that matter? Even though it might be somewhat uncomfortable, for you to say to me to give up this marriage is being too harsh, isn't it? You said you also liked Scott, didn't you?" "Dad, I'm asking you. I really want to marry Scott." My dad did not say anything more to me. Even if I were in my dad's position, it would have been very uncomfortable. It was hard enough when a couple works at the same company. But for in-laws to be working at the same company and on top of that, he's the boss. I felt sorry for my dad. But he wasn't the only one who was uncomfortable. So was I. My father-in-law started to treat me as if I was his employee. He would call me at all times of day or night, and he'd make me run his errands for him. And even on my days off, he would call me to do his secretarial work. I felt like my dad and I both had become his slaves, but I could no longer speak up my mind like before. How could I do that to my dad's boss? Because I had many years of working, I knew very well what kind of jerk my dad's boss was like. So I had to just grit my teeth and bear with him. Time passed on, and I was finished with almost all of the wedding preparations. My husband and I were on our way to get our wedding invitations. However, my father-in-law called me. "What? To lie to my mother-in-law? It's not that hard. Your mother-in-law will be calling you today. Then, just tell her that you and I were together, to go to the department store. Tell her that I bought you a luxury brand handbag, okay? If you say something else, you won't be able to get married. Got that? Father, are you having an affair? Are you asking me to cover up for that? Then I won't do it. You won't? Okay, then do whatever you want. But know this one thing. At your father's age, he's up for the first to be on the list for being laid off. You know better. If you're being that way, I have no reason to stick out my neck for him. So, do whatever you want accordingly. He said what he wanted to say and hung up on me. It seemed that he must have bought a luxury brand handbag for his mistress and got caught by his wife's friend. He was using me as his alibi to cover up his crime. The more I thought of it, the more upset I became. On top of his abusive behavior, now he was trying to use me, his daughter-in-law, to collude and cover up his wrongdoings. On top of that, he was using my dad as a hostage to force his despicable ways. So I took my wedding invitation and went to my father-in-law's office with my husband. I wanted to tell him to come clean with his mistress in front of my husband. But something totally unexpected happened. When I asked for my father-in-law at the lobby, an employee said, "The vice president is not here." What? Vice president? At that moment, something clicked. Vice president? Then that boss who made my dad do all his personal errands like a servant, including when his daughter got married. Suddenly, I felt conflicted. My dad had told me that the woman we met at the bookstore was his boss's wife. That meant my father-in-law was leading a double life. On top of that, he was blatant enough to invite company staff to his daughter's wedding with his mistress. I couldn't believe his audacity. Yet for his own son, he was asking for a small wedding because he didn't want to be caught with his mistress. He was just trash. It dawned on me why my dad was against this marriage. He knew all along, and that's why he didn't want me to marry into such a family. I didn't know that, and I acted like a slave for that man as my father-in-law. And I became furious at myself. That's why people's impression doesn't lie. He looked just like the way he acted. Selfish and boorish. My husband seemed to have caught on too, and was flustered. I left the invitation card at the lobby to give to my father-in-law and came back with my husband. That night, I confronted my dad. "Dad, you knew early on that your boss was having an affair, right? Why didn't you tell me? Then I wouldn't have been fooled and acting like a fool." I told him that I was going to call my mother-in-law and tell her about her husband's illicit affair. My husband was very upset and we thought it over a lot. We had to consider my mother-in-law's pain when she found out the truth. But my dad stopped me. "Susan, don't do that. Just ignore it and cancel this wedding. I am pleading with you. It's embarrassing to say this in front of you, but I have to work there. I have to marry off Ricky and Eddie and provide support for you. Then I need to earn more money. You might criticize me for being a coward, but I have to take care of you even if I have to work like that. So please don't do it for me." I felt so angry inside, but when my dad pleaded with me like that, I couldn't do what I wanted. However, I didn't want to be treated like that any longer. Then something unexpected happened. Because of the wedding invitation we left at my father-in-law's company lobby, the news of his illicit affair spread throughout his company. My husband was the one who told me to just leave the wedding invitation card at the lobby since his father was hard to see at home because he was too busy with his mistress. Now that their daughter, living at the house of his mistress, got married, out of his father's greed, he mobilized his employees at work to the wedding using his title as the vice president. This backfired on him when the employees went to the wedding, where their vice president had claimed it was for his only daughter only a month ago. To see his son's wedding invitation card with a different name than his wife, it was irrefutable proof. Whether it was me or not, he already had it in his mind to have his son's wedding held privately with only his family attending. What kind of selfish and rotten father is that? When it rains, it pours. My mother-in-law, who never goes to her husband's company, happened to drop by that day and heard the rumor. Of course, I had a slight push in that. I asked her that we should go by her husband's work to ask him to buy us lunch. My mother-in-law, who was usually very quiet and accommodating, found out about her husband's extramarital affair and turned into a tiger. "You crazy old man. How could you be a human being? What? Your only daughter's wedding? If she is your only daughter, then who is the son? Is he a ghost? You kept saying how B blood type women are. You should get a taste of your wife who's B blood type and see how hard she can punch you. She scratched her husband's face and body all over with her sharp nails. All over his study, her husband's pulled-out hair was floating in the air like dust. My father-in-law, who hated blood type B so much, was beaten up by his wife and was pleading for her forgiveness. Honey, it's a misunderstanding. Please, she is my deceased best friend's daughter and I was just acting like her father at her wedding. Please, it's the truth. Please believe me. My father-in-law was lying through his teeth, even in that situation, to his wife. My mother-in-law got furious because he kept lying, so she picked up one of his trophies and threw it at him, causing his nose to bleed. You bastard! How dare you open your dirty mouth and spew out lies? No matter how urgent, how could you use your dead friend to cover up your illicit affair? I don't know why the devil is doing and not taking trash like you to hell. You know what? What do people with blood type B hate the most? It's lying. Do you know how much I hated you for all your lies while I lived with you? Yet in this situation you are still lying. Trash, like you should just die to save this world? You dirty trash! I was there to witness my usually quiet mother-in-law lose her temper. My father-in-law, who was always abusive towards his staff and bragged about money, got humiliated at work and was fired for the misuse of his power. He also got divorced with a huge alimony order to be paid to his wife. Additionally, he was betrayed by his beloved mistress. It was discovered when my mother-in-law sued his mistress, and in trying to negotiate for a lesser compensation, she inadvertently confessed the truth. Thanks to that, my father-in-law lost everything, including his son, and ended up going back to his hometown and is living by himself. He reaped what he sowed. After the stormy tornado hit the family, my husband and I finally had our wedding. Although it is not a 2,000 square feet condo, my husband and I started our newlywed in a small townhouse. We decided to start small and later move to a larger house. We wanted to do it all on our own. After going through my father-in-law's case, I started to appreciate my own father's love and attention even more. When I saw that not all fathers were like my dad, I respected my father more for sacrificing his life for his children and working hard all by himself. As his daughter, I have to give him my love accordingly. Thank you for listening to my story. Spend precious time with your family and be happy.